Hello all. In today's video, we'll learn a few things about strain measurement. So welcome to Quest Zero, the platform to learn things that we don't know. This strain measurement that I have taken, it is a part of mechanical measurements and metrology syllabus and pertaining to students studying engineering in mechanical, aeronautical and stuff. And in particular, the BTU syllabus, if you consider, it is a part of module 5 for the students. So in today's lecture or of the video, we'll discuss about theory of strain gauges first and the different types of strain gauges, and in that particular what are electrical strain gauges, and then preparation and mounting of the strain gauges when you want to use them, what is gauge factor, and also the methods that are employed for strain measurement. Let's begin. What is strain? Generally, whenever you have an object and you apply a force over a period of time, there is a small deformation in the given object. So this deformation of the material will result in strain. That is what we call it as strain. So if you observe the simulation on the right, the yellow color arrows denote the forces that are being applied on the face, and because of those forces, this bar being fixed at one end is getting stretched on the other side. So what exactly is this strain? We denote it by a mathematical formula called as dl by L, where dl is the change in length. If this is L, so if this is L, so from here to here which gets deformed, we call it as dl. So this is dl and this will be L. So strain is the relation or ratio of dl to L mathematically, and if you want to say it by in a general sense, it is the amount of deformation that a body undergoes because of the application of forces on it. Now, why should we measure this strain? Obviously, whenever you want to determine the amount of deformation, you will measure, but the other use of strain being measured is, suppose you have an object which is not the regular object and whose cross sectional area is not a regular geometrical figure. So if you had a regular object with a regular geometrical figure, you can directly apply the formula and obtain the stress that are generated inside the component. But generally that doesn't happen in the realistic world, wherein the components are of very complex geometry and you cannot apply the known relations of your mathematics to directly obtain the value of stress. So in those circumstances, whenever you measure the amount of deformation that a body has undergone because of the application of load, you can easily find out the stresses that are generated by using the relation E into epsilon, where E denotes the Young's modulus of that particular material. Epsilon will not be calculated by dl by L formula, but it will be measured from the measuring instruments that will be employed. Okay. So going further, what are the different types of strain gauges? There has to be different methods in which the strain gauges are built. So the first or the foremost is mechanical strain gauges. For example, the Berry type gauges, the Hagenberger type. And why do we differentiate between the different strain gauges is the only factor that we consider for differentiation or the classification is the method that is being employed for amplification of the signal. So the next type is optical strain gauges, where optical methods will be employed to amplify the signals to the readout stage. example, or the best example for it will be Tuckerman optical strain gauge. And the last type is electrical strain gauges, which includes strain gauges or electrical strain gauges based on change in resistances or any change in capacitance or any change in inductance, or it could be even piezoelectric type of materials employed for strain gauges. So these four will contribute to electrical strain gauges. We'll take the first example of a mechanical strain gauge. As I told you, in mechanical strain gauges, the amplification of the signal to the readout stage will be through mechanical linkages. So what are these mechanical linkages that could be employed? So we'll go through the diagram first. All must be familiar with this test specimen which has been shown. This is called as the dog bone test specimen, which is used on UTM machines, probably in your basic material testing lab or metallographic and material testing lab. It would have been employed in the UTM to measure the tensile, or you plot the stress strain curve for a component under tension. So similar component whose deformation that needs to be determined will be used, and the Berry type extensometer has two knife edges on it. So this is one knife edge and the other is right here. So the one is fixed, this end will be fixed, and this will have a provision to move. So when this has a provision to move, there will be a pivoting point employed. So when the component is under tensile load, the expansion or the elongation of the component takes place. So when the component elongates, the movable knife edge which has been in contact with the tensile force, will also try to move along with the elongated specimen. So when it tries to elongate along with the specimen, there is a pivotal point. This entire linkage magnifying lever that has been denoted will try to rotate. So when it tries to rotate, it will be in contact with a dial indicator, and with the application of force on this dial indicator, the dial will start to rotate. So once the dial rotates by a certain measurement, you can say that for this amount of circular rotation of the needle in the dial gauge, so much amount of linear elongation has taken place in the test specimen. So a small amount of elongation that happens on the specimen will be magnified through this magnification lever, and the reading will be obtained on the dial indicator. So this is the mechanical type of strain gauge called as Berry extensometer, which are very rarely used these days. This is a photograph showing the Berry extensometer in application. So the next type of strain gauge, the optical strain gauge. We'll discuss about the most famous Tuckerman optical strain gauge. It is not completely an optical strain gauge. The amplification of the elongation is achieved through optical means, hence it is called as an optical strain gauge, but the mechanical elements are also present. So it can be aptly called as mechanical optical strain gauge. So the construction of this employs a mechanical strain gauge just like the Berry extensometer uses, but on top of it you will have an autocollimator, and this autocollimator, there is an eyepiece through which you can observe the light which comes and falls on the reticule. Reticule will have some markings on it. There will be a lamp source which emits light. So once the light passes through the objective lens, it will fall on the first set of mirrors right here, reflecting mirrors. From this reflecting mirror, it will then hit the lozenges. This lozenge will be in contact with the test specimen. The knife edge from here, this will be your gauge length. So one end is fixed, the other end will have a lozenge which reflects the light back to the reticule. So now when there is no deformation in the resting condition, the light coming from the reticule will again be reflected back to the same point. Hence you can say that the deflection or deformation is nil. But when the test specimen is subjected to forces, say suppose tensile force, and the component begins to elongate. So when this elongation takes place, the lozenges will rotate in an axis which is 90 degree to the axis of your test specimen. So when this lozenge rotates, the reflection will also be changed. Now the light will be received at a different point on the reticule. Adjusting the position of the markings on the reticule, you can easily say that so much amount of deformation has been occurred on the test specimen. So the rays will come from the light source, which is lamp. It will fall on the first set of reflecting surfaces, then it will hit the lozenge, and when the specimen is under elongation or load, the deformation that has taken place will make the lozenge to rotate at an axis which is perpendicular to the test specimen axis, and hence because of the rotation of the lozenge, the reflected light rays will not fall on the same point as it was falling before the deformation or elongation. So now there is a small differentiation in the, or there is a small difference from the point of its origin to point of its current reflection. So while using the marking scale on the reticule, by moving the scale, the amount of divisions that it has moved, you can relate it to the amount of the deformation or elongation that has happened on the test specimen. So this is Teckermann's optical strain gauge. Next, coming to the different types of electrical strain gauges. So electrical strain gauges, as we have discussed before, it will work based on the change in either resistance, capacitance or inductance, or if it is a piezoelectric material, then deformation is directly related to the amount of electricity or voltage that is being developed. So the one which we were going to discuss with respect to the syllabus point of view or with respect to the examination point of view is electrical resistance strain gauge. So these are the vastly employed strain gauges, hence we discuss more on this, though there are other piezoelectric strain gauges are also there, but electrical resistance strain gauges are the ones that are widely used these days in the world. Hence we discuss the electrical strain gauges. So we all know that the resistance of a material will change with its deformation. This particular relation is used to determine the amount of deformation, or any change in resistance is now related to the deformation. How does it change? We know that resistance is directly proportional to length and inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area. So any deformation will alter the length and also the cross-sectional area. Hence it will also alter the resistance. So we can easily form a relation between the resistance and the deformation. So this was first showed by Lord Kelvin, the same person whose name we use for measurement of temperature. So he showed that using copper and iron wire, he showed that this resistance can be changed by changing the length and cross-sectional area, and it was way back in 1856. But the real application of strain gauges or development of strain gauges was only done in 1931, and that too by Carlson. He invented the first wire type of strain gauges, and these are of unbonded type. What are these unbonded type, bonded type, we'll discuss later. But remember that Carlson developed only unbonded type of strain gauges, and that too wires type. And then Bloch, using carbon film resistance, he found the first bonded strain gauge by directly applying the film resistance on the surface of the strained material. So from unbonded type we moved on to, or the bonded type of strain gauges were developed, and these bonded type of strain gauges, they had its own advantages compared to unbonded type. So these bonded type of strain gauges could be directly applied on the surface of the material whose strain was to be measured. So unbonded type, that couldn't be done. So that was the major disadvantage, and it was overcome by the bonded type of strain gauges. So finally 1950s and onwards, because of the vast development that took place in terms of industry and the material research, the manufacturing processes, the advancements in it, it paved way to foil type of strain gauges, which is nothing but an extension of bonded type of strain gauges. So wire, instead of using wire, the foil type was employed. So what are these unbonded wire type resistance strain gauges? So if you observe the diagram on the right, so it consists of two bases. One is a moving base and one is a fixed base, or we can call it as two plates. One plate which is fixed, the other one which moves. The movement could be like this from. So when the force is being applied on the moving plate will move. There are four wire strain gauges, resistance strain gauges, which are not bonded in form. This figure actually represents the top view of the unbonded resistance strain gauges. So you will connect first strain gauge A from fixed base to the moving plate. Similarly, B will also be connected, C will also be connected, and D will also be connected from moving plate to fixed base. Now these four strain gauges will be connected in Wheatstone network or Wheatstone bridge network, and when suppose the force is being applied in this direction, when the plate moves downwards, the moving plate, A and B will be in tension, C and D will be in compression. So the amount of resistance change in A and B will be equal, the amount of resistance change in C and D will be equal. Suppose the force being applied is in the upward direction, then the moving plate will also move in the upward direction, resulting in A and B being in contraction or compression, and C and D being in elongation or tension. So as I told you, the four resistance wires will be used, and as I told you, it will be connected in bridge circuits. Generally the Wheatstone bridge network you can apply. So the ratio now between A, B, C, D resistances will change. So with that, the amount of the voltage being read in the galvanometer or the potentiometer will be used as a measurement of the displacement that has taken place because of the application of force. Now when there is no force being applied, all these four which are of same material and which are of same resistance will give R1, suppose RA by RD and RB by RC will give you the same values, sorry, RA into RD or RA by RC and RB by RD, however you connect the Wheatstone bridge network depends on it. So it will give you a value which will be constant. So when there is a change, then there is some amount of voltage being generated, and the measure of this voltage will give you the measure of deformation or the displacement the moving plate has taken place. Okay. The next type of resistance strain gauge is bonded type strain gauge, and this has the advantage of being placed on the material itself, on the surface of the material, to measure the amount of strain that takes place. So it will have the resistive elements which are in the form of grid, and there will be two lead wires which can be taken for connecting to any electrical circuits outside the strain gauge. So it will be covered by a backing film. Backing film can be anything. It could be cement, it could be an epoxy. Why a backing material is required? Backing material is required for either insulation as well as for keeping it on the specimen. So bonded strain gauges are usually fixed or attached to the specimen surface. When it is properly attached, it contracts or expands along with the specimen under loading. So the amount of resistance change is now very much accurate compared to the amount of the change in the elongation that takes place. So it could be either in grid, foil or wafer form. Generally it will be in grid form. The backing materials, as I told you, it could be an epoxy, bakelite, or sandwich between these resistive elements. So the resistive elements will be sandwiched between these backing films. The backing films, as I told you, it provides the electrical insulation. So the present type of resistance strain gauges that are widely used is the foil type of resistance strain gauges. So this is very similar to bonded type of wire strain gauges, but the only difference being you have more number of grids, as well as the loop which connects the different grids, it is quite wide in length or width. So this is a photograph showing the foil type of strain gauge which is employed for measuring the deformation. So in these, the resistive elements will be in the form of foil grid, and thickness of this foil grid will be very thin, 0.005 millimeter it could be, and it is manufactured by the etching process. As I told you, because of the advancements in the manufacturing process as well as the materials, we could come up with foil type of resistance strain gauges. And again, as a backing material for this, epoxy, bakelite or paper can be used. And these foil type resistance strain gauges, they have the capability of dissipating the heat which gets generated because of passing of current. So whenever the resistance to current is offered, there is some amount of heat generated. So this heat should be dissipated effectively. If not, then the amount of heat will also play a role in the change in the resistance that takes place. So hence the dissipation, effective dissipation of heat will play a major role in obtaining accurate strain measurements. And it also has larger area of contact on the surface. And the final advantage is cross sensitivity is also reduced. So what is meant by cross sensitivity, we'll discuss in the next slide. So cross sensitivity in strain gauge. If you observe a component, for example the dog bone specimen that we were discussing, because of tension, the length of the material increases but the cross sectional area decreases. So there is two deformation that is simultaneously happening. One deformation is with respect to the length, the other deformation is with respect to the area. The deformation with respect to area, which is perpendicular to the direction of the load, we call it as transverse directional, and the directional in which the load is acting, we take it as the strain. So cross sensitivity, it is defined as the sensitivity of the gauge to strains that are transverse or cross sectional direction to the measured strain. So the sensitivity of the strain gauge to that other deformation which is not of interest for us, how much of the strain gauge is sensitive to that particular deformation. Suppose it is very sensitive to change in cross sectional area, then the amount of resistance change that is taking place will be very high, and it will not be directly related to the amount of change that is taking place with respect to the length, which is of our utmost importance considering the tensile test specimen. So we want strain gauges which offer very less sensitivity to change in the area. So because of the application of tensile forces, it should elongate more, but it should have very minimal change in the cross sectional area, or the transverse direction it should have minimal of change. By this, as we have seen the resistance formula, if you recall, the resistance is directly proportional to the length but indirectly proportional to the area. So any small change will result in higher value of the resistance. Hence this change should be as minimum as possible. It should take only the strain or the deformation along the length as the major factor, and this transverse directional strain should be very minimal. So if you consider the strain gauge, now whenever there is a force which acts, the lengthwise it can change, but the widthwise it should not show very much deformation. So if it does show, then the resistance will also be very high. So we cannot directly relate that particular resistance change to the change in length alone. So hence we take up cross sensitivity as a major characteristic. So it is undesirable characteristic as measured strain will not be accurate in the presence of large cross sensitivity. So cross sensitivity should be as small as possible. So the strains along the transverse direction should be minimal. So it generally occurs due to the loops at the end of the grids in bonded and foil type of strain gauges. These are the loops which are present at the bonded wire strain gauge and foil type strain gauges. So in foil type strain gauges, since you incorporate larger loops, the amount of transverse strain is minimized. Thereby the cross sensitivity is also minimized. Okay. The other important characteristic of a strain gauge is gauge factor. So what is gauge factor? It is the sensitivity of the strain gauge. So how sensitive is a strain gauge to the measurement of deformation? So it is defined as the ratio of relative change in resistance to the relative change in length. So mathematically it could be represented as dr by r by dl by L. So dr by r is the relative change in resistance and dl by L is relative change in length. So ratio of relative change in resistance to relative change in length will give you the gauge factor, and gauge factor should be good for a particular strain gauge. So now we have known, or we discussed about the different types of strain gauges. Now we look into the preparation and mounting of these strain gauges. So first you need to prepare the required surface on which the strain gauge will be mounted. Generally what happens, the surface will be covered with dirt, and placing the strain gauges on those dirt will not enhance the amount of contact with the test surface. Hence first we need to clean the entire surface using alcohol, acetone or any other degreasing agent. So dirt as well as grease which should be completely removed from the surface where the specimen will be, where the strain gauge will be mounted. So once it is degreased as well as cleaned, it should be smoothened using silicon carbide paper. Why do we have to do this? Suppose there are rust or any uneven surface or some foreign agent has been spilled on it like paint and stuff, it should be removed by abrasion. So next you will mark the area where the strain gauge will be mounted. So layout lines will be drawn, and also if required the reconditioning with the same above two steps and using a neutralized agent to make suitable pH level for the mounting of strain gauge can be employed. So once these things are done, the surface is prepared, the strain gauges can be mounted. So how do you mount the strain gauges? The adhesives should be applied on the surface of the specimen, and the specimen must be gently placed on the adhesive, and we should make sure that any air bubbles which are trapped between the specimen and the strain gauge through the adhesive layer should be removed by gently applying pressure which is sufficient. The higher amount of pressure application may result in damage of the strain gauges or complete removal of adhesive below the strain gauge. So only gently it should be taken care. So once this is done, this specimen and strain gauge can be kept aside for the bonding of strain gauge to the adhesive as well as for the test specimen. So once the adhesive hardens, holding both the strain gauge and the specimen, electric connections can be provided to the strain gauge, considering that we take up foil type or bonded type of strain gauges. Now, the different types of strain measurement. The measurement of strain, the different electrical connections that are employed is, the first and foremost is Wheatstone bridge network. Apart from that, using potentiometer and ballast circuit, they also use it for strain measurement. But today we are going to discuss only about the Wheatstone bridge network that will be employed. So consider the diagram shown. Now the forces that are being applied on the specimen, if you see the strain gauges, there are two strain gauges that we use, strain gauge 1 and strain gauge 2. The first strain gauge, it is attached to a specimen on which there is no load being acted. So this specimen will be unstrained. There won't be any deformation in this. But the second strain gauge will be attached to the test specimen whose deformation or elongation needs to be measured, and which is under load F. R1 is the resistance of the strain gauge connected to unstrained specimen. R2 is the resistance of strain gauge connected to this test specimen. R3 and R4 will be made of the same material as the strain gauge, and it will have its own resistance values. So when the forces are being applied, there is a small relation for balancing of Wheatstone bridge network. R1 into R4 must be equal to R2 into R3 for balanced circuit. Now when the elongation takes place, R2 will change. R2, which is this resistance of the strain gauge connected to the test specimen, it will change. So once R2 changes, the balance of the circuit is now disturbed, and the reading will be obtained on the galvanometer on the circuit. So this galvanometer reading will give you a direct relation to the amount of change in the resistance at R2, and hence the amount of deformation of the test specimen. So as we had discussed, this is how a Wheatstone bridge circuit network using strain measurement works, and in this there are two methods that could be employed. So the first method is called as the deflection method, and the second method is called as null method. What is the difference between these two? So deflection method employs the same concept. Both the methods employ the same arrangement of connections, but in the deflection, as and when the resistance changes, there will be a deflection in the galvanometer, and these deflections will be taken as a measurement of change in the length of the specimen. This method can be suitably applied for both static measurements as well as dynamic measurement. So each time there is an elongation, there will be a deflection in the galvanometer, and this deflection will be measured. But in null method, suppose you apply 10 kg of load or 10 Newton of load, and then the elongation that takes place, it will produce a deflection in the galvanometer right here, and you will adjust the other resistance and make the entire bridge circuit to be balanced again. So you will make the deflection of the galvanometer to become null or zero by changing the other resistances. Hence, the next 10 newtons of force that you applied, or 20 newtons of force incremental if you take, it will produce some more deflection, and again you will vary the resistances and make it to null or zero. So this type of strain measurement, the null method, it is highly efficient when you apply it only for static measurements, where the application of load is very nil or very slow or constant, or it is only one force that is being applied at a time. So here the amount of resistance change that is employed to make the deflection back to zero is the amount of it is related to the amount of deformation of the test specimen. But in deflection method, you can apply it for either static conditions or dynamic conditions, and each time there is an elongation, there will be a deflection in the galvanometer, and that particular deflection itself is taken as the measurement of the amount of elongation. Okay, so these are the two methods that will be employed for strain measurement. Okay, thank you. Any doubts that you have, you can send it in the comment section. Any suggestions for improvements are also welcome, and I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if there are any other topics that needs to be covered, do let me know. That will be covered in the next class. Thank you.